Welcome, amazing friend, to English Empire, your place to learn, grow, and think deeper. Today's journey is a double win, because while you improve your English listening and understanding skills, you'll also discover one of the most dramatic real-life stories in modern history, the rise and fall of Saddam Hussein. Through this series, you'll not only practice your English listening and understanding skills, but also explore politics, power, and the lessons that shaped the Middle East for decades. So as you listen, try to focus on how the words connect. Notice the storytelling flow, learn new vocabulary, and think about the meaning behind every event. It's English learning with real knowledge, powerful, emotional, and unforgettable. If you enjoyed this kind of educational storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps English Empire keep growing and bringing you more stories that teach and inspire. Now, take a deep breath, stay focused, and let's start the journey. Part 1. The Making of a Dictator, 1937 to 1979. In the dusty village of al-Auja, near Tikrit, a child was born on April 28, 1937. A child whose life would later alter the fate of Iraq and reverberate through the entire Middle East. His name was Saddam Hussein Abd al-Majid al-Tikriti, and he would rise from a world of tribal poverty and political instability to become one of the most feared and controversial leaders of the 20th century. Early years. Born into hardship. Saddam's early life was marked by poverty, violence, and abandonment. His father either died or disappeared before he was born, and his mother, Suba Tulfa al-Musallat, reportedly attempted to abort him in despair. She later remarried, and Saddam's stepfather, Ibrahim al-Hassan, was known for his cruelty. Life in Tikrit was harsh, a small, rural Sunni Arab community where loyalty, revenge, and honor ruled over law. Saddam grew up with a deep sense of resentment and a constant struggle for control and respect. He found refuge with his maternal uncle, Khairallah Talfa, a man who would play a decisive role in shaping his worldview. Talfa was a fervent Arab nationalist and a former army officer who despised British influence in Iraq. Under his influence, Saddam developed an intense hatred for imperialism, Zionism, and foreign domination. This early indoctrination of Arab pride and anti-Western sentiment would define his political ideology for decades to come. Education and ambition. Saddam's early education was fragmented. He didn't attend school until the age of 10, yet he quickly displayed intelligence, determination, and ambition. Later, he moved to Baghdad to live with his uncle, who encouraged him to pursue education and introduced him to the world of politics. By the early 1950s, Iraq was a monarchy under King Faisal II, heavily influenced by Britain. Many young Iraqis viewed this arrangement as humiliating, a symbol of Western domination. In Baghdad, Saddam was drawn to the revolutionary ideas spreading across the Arab world. He was particularly inspired by Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic Egyptian leader who preached Arab unity and socialism. It was during this period that Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party, a movement that combined Arab nationalism with socialism, aiming to unite all Arab nations into one powerful state. For Saddam, the Ba'ath Party became more than an ideology. It was a path to power. The Ba'ath Party and the First Coup Attempt, 1959. Saddam's political career began in the shadows of underground movements. In 1958, a coup led by General Abdul Karim Qasim overthrew the Iraqi monarchy and established a republic. Initially, the Ba'ath Party supported Qasim, but tensions quickly arose. Qasim's policies were too independent for both the Baathists and foreign powers. He maintained friendly relations with the Soviet Union and refused to join Nasser's Arab Union. In October 1959, the Ba'ath Party organized an assassination attempt on Qasim in Baghdad. Saddam, then only 22 years old, was one of the gunmen. The operation failed. Qasim was only wounded. Saddam was injured in the leg and fled the country. He crossed into Syria and later Egypt, where he lived in exile for several years. While in Cairo, Saddam continued his studies, attended law school, and developed his revolutionary image. Egypt's intelligence, which supported the Baathists, took notice of him. This period shaped Saddam's understanding of power. It must be taken by force, maintained by fear, and used to destroy all opposition. Return to Iraq and rise through the Ba'ath Party. In 1963, Qasim was finally overthrown and executed in a violent coup supported by the Ba'ath Party. Saddam returned from exile expecting a position of influence. However, internal conflicts within the Baathists led to their quick fall from power. Saddam was imprisoned for 2 years, but even in prison he displayed a remarkable ability to organize, manipulate, and lead. When the Baathists regained power in 1968, Saddam was ready. The new regime was led by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam's distant cousin and fellow Tikriti. Saddam became his deputy, officially the vice president, but in reality the man behind the curtain. Saddam gradually took control of the country's intelligence and security services. Through the creation of the Mukhabarat intelligence agency, he built a network of spies and informants that penetrated every layer of Iraqi society. Fear became a political tool, and Saddam mastered its use. Consolidation of power. The cult of Saddam. The 1970s were the decade of Saddam's rise. He was still the deputy to al-Bakr, but it was clear who held real authority. Saddam began to build his cult of personality. His face appeared on posters, his speeches filled radio waves, and his portraits hung in classrooms and government offices. He projected himself as the protector of Iraq, the defender of the Arab nation, and the father of the revolution. His strategy for power was simple yet ruthless: reward loyalty, destroy dissent. Tribal alliances, family connections, and regional loyalties all played a role in his system of governance. Many of his key security officials came from his hometown, Tikrit, forming what became known as the Tikriti Circle, a loyal network that ensured Saddam's control. To the public, Saddam presented himself as a visionary modernizer. Iraq, under his influence, began ambitious development projects. Oil nationalization in 1972 brought enormous revenue, allowing massive investment in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and military modernization. Baghdad grew into one of the most modern capitals in the Arab world. Literacy campaigns were launched, and living standards improved dramatically, especially for Sunni Arabs. However, this prosperity was built on the foundation of oppression. The Kurdish population in the north and the Shia majority in the south were often marginalized, monitored, or suppressed. Any sign of opposition was crushed. Thousands of political prisoners filled Iraq's prisons, many of whom were executed after secret trials. Dealing with the Kurds and Shi'a. Throughout the 1970s, Saddam faced repeated Kurdish uprisings in northern Iraq. The Kurds, seeking autonomy, found support from Iran and the United States. In response, Saddam used both diplomacy and brutality. In 1970, he offered the Kurds a form of autonomy, but the agreement collapsed when oil fields were excluded from Kurdish control. When rebellion reignited, Saddam responded with military force. Entire villages were bombed or razed, and thousands of Kurds were displaced. He also manipulated tribes and leaders, playing one faction against another, a tactic that would define his rule. Similarly, the Shia population was viewed with suspicion. Saddam feared their loyalty to Iran's religious leadership more than their loyalty to Iraq. Religious clerics who criticized the regime were executed or disappeared, setting the stage for deeper sectarian divisions. Modernization and the illusion of progress. Despite the underlying repression, Iraq under Saddam seemed to be thriving. Oil prices soared after the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, and Baghdad's coffers overflowed. Saddam poured billions into industrialization, education, and the military. He aimed to turn Iraq into the leading power of the Arab world. He often presented himself as a man of science and progress. He launched programs to eradicate illiteracy, improve healthcare, and build universities. Women were encouraged to work and study. To many Iraqis, this was a golden age. They had jobs, stability, and national pride. Yet behind this facade of progress lay an empire of fear. Saddam's intelligence services monitored every conversation, every classroom, and every mosque. Informants were everywhere. Children were taught to sing songs praising Saddam, the great leader. Dissent was met with swift and public punishment. Executions were televised. The message was clear: the state is Saddam, and Saddam is the state. The fall of al-Bakr and the rise of the president. By the late 1970s, Saddam had effectively sidelined Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. Old, ill, and increasingly irrelevant, al-Bakr was pressured to resign. On July 16, 1979, Saddam Hussein officially became the President of the Republic of Iraq, Chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and Secretary-General of the Ba'ath Party, all at once. He now held absolute power, but he also feared it could be taken from him, just as he had taken it from others. Only days after assuming the presidency, Saddam orchestrated one of the most chilling events in modern political history, the 1979 Ba'ath Party purge. In a dramatic televised meeting of the party leadership, Saddam accused several senior members of conspiring against the revolution. As each name was read aloud, the accused were dragged out of the hall. Some pleaded for mercy, others stood in shock. Within days, hundreds were executed, many by their own colleagues, forced to carry out the killings to prove loyalty. The purge eliminated any potential rivals and cemented Saddam's total control. Iraq had become a one-man state, a new era of fear. By 1979, Saddam's Iraq stood at a crossroads. The nation was rich, militarily strong, and politically unified, but only on the surface. Beneath that unity lay deep divisions between Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds, and an atmosphere of terror where trust no longer existed. Saddam's regime was now both admired and feared across the Arab world. He positioned himself as the successor to Nasser, the champion of Arab nationalism, and the guardian of Iraq's destiny. Yet he was also a man haunted by insecurity, convinced that betrayal lurked behind every door. His rise was complete, but the fall was already written in the future. Next came a chain of events that would define the Middle East for decades. The Iranian Revolution, the Iraq-Iran War, and the Gulf War. Saddam would transform from a nationalist hero into an international villain. Part 2. The Dictator and the Wars, 1980 to 1991. When Saddam Hussein took power in 1979, Iraq appeared to be on the verge of greatness. The country was wealthy from oil, its infrastructure modern, and its military one of the largest in the Arab world. Baghdad's skyline reflected progress, and its leader projected the image of strength and unity. But behind this glittering facade lay fear, oppression, and paranoia. Saddam ruled with an iron hand, and the world would soon see how far he was willing to go to maintain control and expand his power. The Iranian Revolution and Saddam's ambitions. In 1979, the political map of the Middle East changed dramatically. The Shah of Iran, long a U.S. ally, was overthrown in a massive popular uprising, and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to establish an Islamic republic. This revolution sent shockwaves across the region. To Saddam, it was both a threat and an opportunity. He feared the spread of Shia fundamentalism from Iran into Iraq, where the majority of the population was Shia. Khomeini openly called on Iraqi Shias to rise up against Saddam's secular, Sunni-dominated government. Saddam, in turn, portrayed himself as the defender of Arabism against Persian influence. But Saddam also saw a chance. The Iranian army was weakened and disorganized after the revolution, and Saddam believed he could seize the disputed Shatt al-Arab waterway, which formed the border between the two nations. Control of this strategic route meant dominance over the Gulf's oil exports. Convinced that victory would come swiftly, Saddam ordered the invasion of Iran in September 1980. The Iran-Iran War, 1980 to 1988. The war that followed would last 8 years, claiming more than 1 million lives and leaving both countries devastated. Saddam's decision marked the beginning of his downfall, though at first he seemed to hold the upper hand. Iraqi forces quickly advanced into Iranian territory, capturing several towns and oil installations. Saddam declared that he had achieved victory within days, but Iran refused to surrender. Khomeini called for a holy war against Iraq, and soon waves of Iranian volunteers, many of them teenagers, flooded the front lines. The conflict turned into a brutal war of attrition. Trenches, human wave assaults, poison gas attacks, and air raids on cities became routine. Both nations targeted civilians and used child soldiers. By 1982, the tide had turned. Iranian forces recaptured much of the lost territory and pushed into Iraq. Saddam, humiliated, resorted to desperate measures. He ordered the use of chemical weapons, including mustard gas and nerve agents, against Iranian troops, and later against his own Kurdish population. The world condemned it, but most Western nations quietly supported Saddam. The United States, fearing Iranian expansion, secretly provided intelligence, financial aid, and even materials that could be used for chemical weapons. France sold aircraft, and the Soviet Union supplied tanks. Saddam was no longer just Iraq's ruler. He had become a key player in the geopolitical struggle of the Cold War. Propaganda, fear, and survival. Inside Iraq, the war provided Saddam with an excuse to tighten his grip on power. He flooded the media with propaganda, presenting himself as the heroic leader defending Arab civilization against Persian invaders. Massive portraits of Saddam in military uniform were hung in every city, showing him as a fearless commander. He declared the war the Qadisiyah of Saddam, referring to an ancient Arab victory over Persia, turning a modern war into a historical crusade. Yet behind the public image, the country was bleeding. Thousands of young men were dying each month, and families lived in fear of the dreaded knock on the door from the secret police. Even as Iraq struggled, Saddam continued to build palaces, monuments, and statues in his honor. He lived in luxury while ordinary citizens faced rationing and fear. Every Friday sermon in mosques across Iraq included praise for the leader of victories. Still, dissent brewed quietly. The Shia population, inspired by Iran, became increasingly restless, and the Kurds continued to resist Baghdad's control in the north. The Anfal Campaign, 1987 to 1988. As the war dragged on, Saddam turned his fury inward. In 1987, he ordered the Anfal Campaign, led by his cousin Ali Hassan al-Majid, infamously known as Chemical Ali. The campaign targeted Kurdish villages suspected of aiding Iranian forces or Kurdish guerrillas known as Peshmerga. The Anfal Campaign was one of the darkest chapters in modern Middle Eastern history. Entire Kurdish communities were wiped out. Villages were burned, wells poisoned, and farmlands destroyed. Thousands were rounded up and executed. Many disappeared into mass graves. The most notorious act came in March 1988 when Iraqi aircraft dropped chemical bombs on the Kurdish town of Halabja. Around 5,000 civilians, including women and children, were killed in hours, and thousands more were injured. The images of bodies lying in the streets shocked the world, though at that time many Western governments still downplayed Iraq's responsibility, preferring to see Saddam as a counterbalance to Iran. The end of the war. By 1988, both Iraq and Iran were exhausted. Millions had been killed or wounded, economies were shattered, and cities lay in ruins. When Iran finally agreed to a ceasefire in August 1988, Saddam claimed victory. In truth, the war ended where it began, with no territorial gains and enormous losses. Yet Saddam celebrated as though he had won a grand triumph. Military parades filled Baghdad. He appeared on television in a suit, smoking cigars, proclaiming Iraq's historic victory. Behind the scenes, he was already planning the next move. The war had left Iraq deeply in debt, especially to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, who had loaned billions to support Saddam against Iran. But instead of gratitude, Saddam felt resentment. He saw Kuwait as an ungrateful neighbor that had grown rich off oil while Iraq sacrificed lives for the Arab cause. He began to accuse Kuwait of overproducing oil and driving prices down, a move that, he claimed, was economic warfare against Iraq. From ally to outcast. The invasion of Kuwait, 1990. In the summer of 1990, Saddam's patience snapped. Facing $80 billion in war debt and economic collapse, he decided to take what he believed Iraq deserved. He accused Kuwait of stealing oil from the Rumaila field near the border and demanded billions in compensation. When Kuwait refused, Saddam chose war once again. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi tanks and troops rolled into Kuwait. Within 48 hours, the small nation was overrun. The world was stunned. Saddam declared Kuwait Iraq's 19th province and installed a puppet government. He claimed that he was correcting colonial injustices, that Kuwait historically belonged to Iraq. At first, many in the Arab world were confused. Some supported Saddam for standing up to the Gulf monarchies, others feared his aggression. But the global response was swift and united. The United Nations condemned the invasion, imposed economic sanctions, and demanded immediate withdrawal. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, began assembling an international coalition of more than 30 nations, including Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria. They launched Operation Desert Shield to protect Saudi Arabia from a possible Iraqi attack. Saddam, believing the world would not dare to fight him, refused to back down. He boasted that the mother of all battles was coming, vowing to burn half of Israel and turn the Gulf into a graveyard of Americans. He took hundreds of foreign nationals hostage, calling them guests, and placed them at strategic sites to deter bombing. In Baghdad, he appeared on television, smiling confidently, surrounded by frightened Western hostages, even patting children on the head. A chilling display of manipulation. The Gulf War, 1991. By January 1991, diplomacy had failed. The coalition launched Operation Desert Storm, one of the most intense bombing campaigns in modern warfare. For weeks, American and Allied aircraft rained destruction on Iraq's military installations, bridges, communication centers, and even parts of Baghdad itself. The Iraqi army, once the fourth largest in the world, was quickly overwhelmed by superior technology and coordination. Saddam tried to rally his forces with fiery speeches and propaganda, but morale collapsed. In desperation, he launched Scud missiles against Israel and Saudi Arabia, hoping to draw Israel into the war and fracture the Arab coalition. But Israel, under U.S. pressure, did not retaliate. The plan failed. When the coalition ground troops entered Kuwait in late February, the Iraqi army retreated in chaos. The Highway of Death, as it became known, was littered with thousands of destroyed vehicles and bodies of Iraqi soldiers fleeing north. Within 100 hours of ground combat, Kuwait was liberated. The Gulf War was over, but Saddam remained in power. The aftermath: defiance and rebellion. Despite the crushing defeat, Saddam emerged defiant. On Iraqi television, he declared that Iraq had survived the mother of all battles, and thus achieved victory by simply enduring. His propaganda machine portrayed the retreat as a strategic withdrawal. However, Iraq was in ruins. Infrastructure was shattered, the economy destroyed, and sanctions tightened. Food shortages and unemployment spread rapidly. The once proud Iraqi military was humiliated and broken. The real threat to Saddam came not from abroad but from within. Inspired by his defeat, both Shia Muslims in the south and Kurds in the north rose in rebellion. These uprisings, encouraged by U.S. radio broadcasts calling on Iraqis to take matters into their own hands, spread rapidly. For a brief moment, it seemed Saddam's regime might collapse, but the U.S., fearing Iraq's complete disintegration and the rise of Iran-backed Shia groups, chose not to intervene. Saddam seized the opportunity. He unleashed his elite Republican Guard to crush the rebellions. In the south, tanks shelled cities like Basra and Najaf. In the north, the army bombed Kurdish towns. Tens of thousands were killed, and hundreds of thousands of Kurds fled toward Turkey and Iran. Saddam regained control through sheer brutality. Once again, fear became his shield. The Price of Defiance. By the end of 1991, Iraq was a shadow of its former self. The UN imposed severe sanctions that crippled the economy, and international inspectors demanded the destruction of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. Saddam played a dangerous game, allowing partial inspections while hiding his remaining stockpiles and pretending to cooperate. He continued to portray himself as a hero standing up to Western aggression. In Baghdad, he rebuilt mosques and added Quranic inscriptions to the Iraqi flag, presenting himself as a devout Muslim leader, though few believed it. He erected new monuments to victory, including a massive arch formed by two crossed swords held by giant bronze hands modeled after his own. Behind this propaganda, ordinary Iraqis suffered. Sanctions caused widespread malnutrition, lack of medicine, and economic collapse. Yet no one dared to speak openly. Saddam's secret police were everywhere, and the punishment for dissent was death. By the early 1990s, Saddam Hussein had lost his regional influence and international respect, but he retained the one thing he valued most: power. The world saw him as a wounded but dangerous dictator. Inside Iraq, he was both feared and hated, a man whose rule survived only through violence and manipulation. Still, Saddam believed his story was not over. He dreamed of rebuilding Iraq, restoring its military might, and reclaiming his lost glory. He had survived wars, coups, and global condemnation, but his final battle, the one that would end his reign forever, was yet to come. Part 3. The Last Years and the Fall, 1991 to 2006. The guns had gone silent after the Gulf War, but Iraq was far from peace. The once proud nation stood shattered, bombed, sanctioned, and isolated. Saddam Hussein remained in his palaces, still surrounded by loyalists, still defiant, but the man who once dreamed of ruling the Arab world now presided over a country broken by war and fear. His enemies were no longer foreign armies. They were poverty, rebellion, and time itself. Sanctions, suffering, and survival. In the early 1990s, Iraq became one of the most heavily sanctioned nations on Earth. The United Nations imposed sweeping economic restrictions, hoping to pressure Saddam into destroying his weapons of mass destruction programs and accepting international inspections. But the sanctions crippled Iraq's economy more than his dictator. For ordinary Iraqis, life turned into a daily struggle. Hospitals ran out of medicine, food prices skyrocketed, and electricity was unreliable. Infant mortality rates soared, and malnutrition spread even in major cities like Baghdad and Basra. The middle class, once Iraq's backbone, disappeared as professionals were forced to sell possessions just to survive. Saddam, however, used the suffering to his advantage. He blamed the West, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, for Iraq's misery. His regime's propaganda portrayed him as a victim of Western cruelty and a defender of Iraqi dignity. State-run television aired emotional scenes of starving children while narrators condemned American imperialism. In private, Saddam and his inner circle lived lavishly. His palaces, numbering more than 70 across the country, were filled with marble, gold, and luxury imported from abroad through black market networks. The contrast between the leader's extravagance and his people's despair deepened resentment, but fear still silenced any potential rebellion. The Oil for Food Program. By 1996, the humanitarian situation was catastrophic, forcing the United Nations to approve the Oil for Food Program, a deal allowing Iraq to sell limited quantities of oil in exchange for food, medicine, and basic supplies. The idea was simple: ease the suffering without lifting sanctions. Saddam quickly found a way to exploit it. His government manipulated contracts, inflated prices, and took kickbacks from foreign companies. Billions of dollars meant for aid disappeared into secret accounts. The program became another tool of control. Ration cards and food supplies were distributed based on loyalty. Those who opposed the regime were cut off. At the same time, Saddam continued to defy international inspectors. While some of his WMD programs had been dismantled, he refused to provide full transparency. This deliberate ambiguity kept his enemies guessing. He wanted Iran and even his own generals to believe Iraq still possessed chemical and biological weapons. Ironically, this illusion would later contribute to his downfall. Building the myth: religion, power, and fear. During the 1990s, Saddam reinvented himself once more. The secular revolutionary of the 1970s now appeared as a devout Muslim leader. He ordered Allahu Akbar, God is great, to be inscribed in the Iraqi flag in his own handwriting and began quoting the Quran in public speeches. He funded mosque construction, distributed Qurans, and launched what he called a faith campaign. Yet this religious turn was less about faith and more about survival. It aimed to regain legitimacy among Iraq's religious majority, especially the Shia, who viewed his regime with hatred. At the same time, Saddam continued to cultivate the cult of personality. His portraits appeared in every office, school, and street corner. Songs, poems, and even prayers praised him. Children were taught that Saddam is Iraq and Iraq is Saddam. The state's grip tightened through fear. The Mukhabarat, intelligence services, monitored every conversation. A careless joke or an unguarded word could lead to imprisonment, torture, or execution. Families whispered only behind closed doors. The regime's cruelty became an open secret, known to everyone, denied by everyone. Defiance and deception, the weapons inspections. After the Gulf War, the United Nations established UNSCOM, United Nations Special Commission to oversee Iraq's disarmament. Inspectors scoured factories, bunkers, and laboratories, searching for evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Initially, they found and destroyed large quantities of chemical agents and ballistic missiles, but Saddam's government repeatedly obstructed inspections, delaying access, hiding documents, and intimidating witnesses. Saddam believed showing weakness would invite invasion, so he played a dangerous balancing act, pretending to cooperate while maintaining an image of hidden strength. This strategy, meant to deter enemies, eventually backfired. By the late 1990s, frustration in the UN grew. The United States and Britain accused Iraq of deception. When inspectors were expelled in 1998, President Bill Clinton launched Operation Desert Fox, a 4-day bombing campaign targeting military sites and government buildings. Saddam survived yet again, emerging from bunkers to declare victory over American aggression. In reality, the bombings weakened Iraq's infrastructure further and deepened the country's isolation. Saddam's image as a defiant survivor, however, remained intact, at least among some Arabs who saw him as the only leader standing up to the West. The Shadow Years, 1999 to 2002. The final years of Saddam's rule were marked by paranoia and decay. Iraq's once strong military had deteriorated under sanctions, its equipment outdated and its morale broken. The economy functioned through smuggling, corruption, and favoritism. Meanwhile, Saddam's sons, Uday and Qusay Hussein, became notorious for their cruelty and excess. Uday, the eldest, was infamous for brutal outbursts, kidnappings, and even murders. He controlled Iraq's media and sports federations, ruling them with sadistic authority. Qusay, quieter but more strategic, oversaw the elite Republican Guard and internal security. Together, they embodied the regime's corruption and brutality. Despite Iraq's decline, Saddam still dreamed of reclaiming regional power. He believed the Arab world respected strength above all, and he never truly accepted his defeat in Kuwait. He continued to speak of Iraq's destiny, comparing himself to historical conquerors like Nebuchadnezzar and Saladin. But far away in Washington, new leaders were taking notice of him once again, and this time they intended to finish what had begun in 1991. 9/11 and the road to war. On September 11, 2001, the United States was struck by the deadliest terrorist attacks in its history. The world changed overnight. In the aftermath, President George W. Bush declared a global war on terror. Although Iraq had no direct link to al-Qaeda or the attacks, Saddam's name soon resurfaced in U.S. rhetoric. American officials accused Iraq of continuing to possess weapons of mass destruction and harboring terrorists. Old intelligence reports and rumors were revived and magnified. The Bush administration argued that Saddam's regime represented a future threat, a tyrant who might supply terrorists with chemical or biological weapons. Saddam, in turn, responded with his usual defiance. He denied possessing WMDs, but continued to posture as if he did, hoping to deter invasion. He allowed UN inspectors to return in 2002 under UNIMAVIC, United Nations Monitoring, Verification, and Inspection Commission, but tensions kept escalating. Inside Iraq, fear and confusion spread. Many Iraqis no longer believed in Saddam's strength, yet few dared to speak. His government forced people into rallies, burning American flags and chanting slogans against the West. Behind the scenes, the regime scrambled to prepare for war, though few truly believed the Americans would invade again. The 2003 invasion. The end begins. On March 20, 2003, the United States and its allies launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. Massive airstrikes hit Baghdad at dawn, lighting up the sky in what was described as shock and awe. Within days, coalition ground forces advanced from Kuwait, encountering limited resistance. The Iraqi army, demoralized and ill-equipped, collapsed quickly. Many soldiers deserted, while others surrendered without a fight. Saddam appeared on television, dressed in military uniform, vowing to resist and fight until the last drop of blood. But his words rang hollow. By early April, American forces had reached Baghdad. On April 9, 2003, the world watched live as U.S. troops and Iraqi civilians toppled Saddam's giant statue in Firdos Square, a symbolic end to his 24-year rule. Crowds cheered and cursed his name. Others watched in stunned silence. The man who once ruled through fear was now reduced to a hunted fugitive. As Baghdad fell, Saddam vanished. The hunt for Saddam Hussein. For months, the world speculated about Saddam's fate. Some believed he had escaped to Syria. Others thought he was hiding in Tikrit. The U.S. military launched an intensive manhunt, offering a $25 million reward for information leading to his capture. In December 2003, after 8 months of searching, the hunt ended. Acting on a tip, American soldiers raided a small farmhouse near Ad-Dar, close to Tikrit. There, inside a narrow underground hiding place, a spider hole, they found Saddam Hussein, unshaven, tired, and armed with only a pistol. When he was pulled from the hole, Saddam reportedly asked, "I am Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq. I am ready to negotiate." But there was nothing left to negotiate. The image of the once mighty dictator being examined like a prisoner, his beard scraggly and mouth checked for lice, shocked the world. For Iraqis, it was both surreal and symbolic, the ultimate humiliation of a man who had ruled through terror. Trial and execution. Saddam was handed over to the newly formed Iraqi authorities and placed on trial for crimes against humanity. The most significant case focused on the 1982 Dujail massacre, in which more than 140 Shia villagers were killed after a failed assassination attempt against him. The trial, broadcast to the world, became both a legal and political spectacle. Saddam, ever defiant, refused to recognize the court's legitimacy. He shouted at judges, mocked witnesses, and described himself as the true president of Iraq. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. Orders, testimonies, and documents all linked him directly to mass executions and torture. On November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. He showed no sign of remorse, declaring, "Long live Iraq, long live the Arab nation," before being escorted to the gallows. At dawn on December 30, 2006, as the Muslim world marked Eid al-Adha, Saddam Hussein was executed. The grainy cell phone video of his final moments, with guards shouting insults as the noose tightened, spread across the internet within hours. Some Iraqis cheered, others wept, but most simply watched in silence. The man who once ruled as a modern-day pharaoh was gone. Legacy of fire and fear. The fall of Saddam Hussein did not bring peace. His death opened a new era of chaos, civil war, sectarian violence, and foreign occupation. Iraq fractured along ethnic and religious lines. Its institutions destroyed, its people trapped between militias and extremists. For many Iraqis, Saddam's rule had been cruel but predictable. Under him, fear was constant but stable. After him, fear became uncontrollable. The power vacuum gave birth to insurgencies, terrorism, and eventually the rise of ISIS. Outside Iraq, Saddam's name became synonymous with tyranny. Yet historians still debate him. Was he a nationalist who tried to defend Arab sovereignty, or merely a brutal opportunist consumed by power? He left behind a contradictory legacy, a nation once wealthy and educated, now scarred and broken. In the end, Saddam Hussein's rise and fall followed the same pattern as many dictators before him. He built his empire on fear, sustained it with violence, and lost it through arrogance. For decades, he seemed untouchable, a man who defied the world. But power built on terror always collapses, and when it does, it leaves ruins behind. From the dusty streets of Tikrit to the marble halls of Baghdad's palaces, Saddam Hussein's story was one of ambition without restraint, a man who wanted to be remembered as a hero of the Arab world, but became instead a symbol of its deepest tragedies. His rise began with dreams of unity. His rule turned into decades of fear, and his fall marked the end of an era, but not of its consequences. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to English Empire. Your support means everything as we continue bringing you powerful stories that educate, inspire, and challenge the way we see the world. Let's keep growing together, learning from history, and making our own mark on the future. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking journeys. We've only just begun. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, every story teaches us something new.